Okay, welcome everyone. We were just waiting for participants. That's why one. Okay. So can everyone hear me? Can you guys just shout out lah in the comment in the chat box there if you can hear my voice? Because some are saying that they can't hear after thinking. Can already. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so I think so some might be lah. Alright, so welcome everyone to UBI's second online workshop series. To our reoccurring participants, welcome back. To our new participants or viewers out there, thank you for joining us today lah. A quick window here to refresh our memory. Last week we were with Shaolin from Eat, Shoot and Root, where she shared with us her personal journey on urban gardening. So through her session, we touched on farming in urban areas, the realities of urban farming, such as plant life cycle, choosing suitable plants for tropical climate, etc. We've also learned on tips on how to start growing plant seeds, preparing a vegetation bed, prepping the right soil, planting itself, and how to care for plants. Now that we have learned on how to create the urban garden, we will then proceed with learning to fill them with butterflies. Topic for today lah. So to those who aren't familiar with UBI, UBI is short for Urban Biodiversity Initiative. UBI is an independent collective for urban ecology research, conservation and environmental education based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. My name is Shuhana, but you all can call me Shu lah if you all want to ask me anything or whatever. I'll be moderating the talk for all 4 series. Before we proceed, a reminder for all of you, if throughout the session you have any questions, just drop your questions in the chat box. If you all want to sembang-sembang in the chat also can, but stick to the topic lah. And I kindly request for everyone to turn off your microphone and webcam for a smoother flow. So you can see on your bottom left screen the audio. Just click on it so that it will have like a flash across it, so that you will know that your webcam and microphone is off. Alright, so let's go to our agenda for today. This online workshop series organized with the Kota Damansara Community Forest Society and with funding from the Habitat Foundation and the UNDP GEF Small Grants Program aims to develop knowledge and skills among urban communities that want to conserve, improve and manage green spaces in the city. Throughout the whole month of July, we will be running online workshops on various topics related to rewilding urban areas. So joining us for today's topic on butterfly gardens is Dr. Cyren Wong. Hi. Everyone also in the chat box, say hi.
Hi everyone.
Alright, so we'll be learning from our Master Shifu on the principles of a successful butterfly garden. So Dr. Cyren Wong. Entomology is the study on the insect one lah. And then ethnozoology is the study of the past and present interrelationships between human cultures and animals in the environment. Kind of like a mix of the first two orgies. Right. Alright, so Dr. Cyren is also the head of the Malaysia Immersion Hub at Monash University Malaysia, where he gives lectures on the topics of biodiversity, human ecology, and indigenous studies. As the founder of the social media education platform called Naturetalksback, he is an advocate of science and biodiversity communication and education. And that's all from me. I'll be passing the stage to Cyren Wong, so whenever you are ready.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen, yeah, Shu?
Alright.
Can everyone hear me okay? Because I'm getting a little bit of static on my end. Yeah? Okay. All right, so good evening, everyone. Thank you, so much for taking time off and attending this workshop today. On a Friday evening, no less. And I'm generally quite excited to be presenting today. And I also want to thank our organizers, at UBI, at KDCF and the Habitat Foundation, for giving me another opportunity to talk about my lifelong obsession, which are butterflies. So today, I'm going to be speaking on behalf of my team. We are the Tropical Terrestrial Ecology Lab at Monash University Malaysia. And the Butterfly Garden, it holds this really special place in our hearts, because it is also actually the very first project that we embarked on together. And it was really the one that sort of solidified, our position, as a team. And so this evening, what I'm going to be doing is sharing with you some insights that we have gained from our experience in conserving urban biodiversity through butterfly gardening. And so first, one of the things I'll be sharing with you is just sort of like the broad overview of our own experiences, how we set up our garden and what some of our outcomes were. And then I will take you through a more detailed step-by-step walkthrough of what we did, particularly sharing with you some tips, on plant selection for adult butterflies and for caterpillars. And also at the end, I think this is quite important as well. I will also try to talk through some of the key challenges, that we faced when we were trying to push this project forward, from a small garden to a more large-scale one in a sustainable way. So I'm told, by the organizers that there's going to be time for question and answers at the end. And I'm quite a flighty person. I lose my train of thought easily. So I would like to humbly ask you to please, address your questions if you have any to me at the end of the talk once I'm done. Okay, but before I get too far ahead of myself, I would just like to, introduce myself to you. I'm Dr. Cyren. I'm a lecturer at Monash University Malaysia, and I'm an ecological anthropologist and ethnozoologist by training, which are basically, just fancy words for describing someone who studies the relationships between human societies, human communities, and the natural environment. So I actually obtained my PhD only relatively recently, towards the end of 2017. And I wrote my dissertation on the human ecology networks of indigenous communities living in the Bukit Kinta rainforest. I am also a lepidopterist, which is someone who specializes in the study of butterflies and moths. And a chapter of my PhD research was actually focused on butterfly naming and butterfly collection practices among the Semai peoples living in Gopeng and Cameron Highlands. So my obsession with butterflies, it began relatively early on in my childhood. And some of my earliest and fondest memories are actually of rescuing, quote unquote, rescuing caterpillars, from my parents' garden and carefully nurturing them, just to see what they would grow into. And, quite early on, I somehow had, always had this knack of knowing where to find caterpillars, and I could almost find them anywhere, and I guess I simply learned how to recognize some of these telltale signs of their presence, from a young age. And so when we were younger, actually, my parents, they would bring us quite often to parks, for jogs mainly. And I remember there was this one particular park that we went to, where there were, these bushes of small red and yellow flowers, that was just teeming, positively teeming with these plain tiger butterflies. And, honestly, for me, because I'm not a very athletic person, so honestly for me, that was the highlight, of going there to jog over the weekends. And even later on, in my life, I would continuously visit, this spot on my own. So I would continue to go back here occasionally, even as a young adult, just to see the butterflies. And then there was this one time that I went back, and I noticed in particular that there were not that many butterflies left. The first time it happened, I didn't think too much of it. I chalked it all up to something circumstantial. I was thinking, oh, maybe the weather on that day wasn't so good for whatever reason, and all the butterflies were just hiding. But then I began to notice this same trend. Every subsequent time that I went there, that they would, just no longer be that many butterflies, and sometimes, in fact, there would be, none at all. And that's when I found out, by talking to some of the gardeners there, that what had happened is that they had replaced that row of red and yellow flowers, that the butterflies were attracted to. And it really got me thinking, at that point that, that's, I think, the scary thing. When we think about biodiversity conservation in the context of urban species, because so many urban animals, not just butterflies, birds, reptiles, what have you, so many animals that live alongside us are often considered common animals, and so they have a tendency to just sort of blend into the backgrounds of our everyday life. We generally don't pay too much attention to them. We generally don't, take notice of whether they're there or not, unless we are specifically looking for them. And so, in an urban context, it is actually entirely possible, for entire populations of animals to, to dwindle and to eventually become locally extinct, without us actually noticing anything until, it reaches a tipping point, until it, in effect, has become too late. And so I in particular, I like, or I think it's important, to think that the environment that we live in right now, this urban environment, it really represents perhaps what is one of the most dynamic, environments in the world today. After all, we are living, in this era called the Anthropocene, where the scale and the extent of our actions on nature, they can no longer be swept aside, they can no longer be denied. In fact, as a whole, as a human species, we are single-handedly more responsible, for more ecological and geological changes on the planet than all natural phenomenon put together, right? And just as our population, grows every year, so too, have we had to modify more and more of our planet's surface to suit our society's ever-increasing needs. But while our urban environments, are generally built primarily, for human comfort and human habitation, they have also created actually multiple opportunities, for some species of plants and animals as well. Because when you go into a land and you convert it into a city or a housing estate or anything like that, what you're essentially doing is sort of like wiping the slate clean, and allowing things to just sort of like come back. And so there are a lot of these new niches, in the urban environment, these new environmental spaces that are unoccupied, which are unlike any other niche that is found in the natural world. And so various animals, who are capable of adapting, have actually colonized these niches, and they've created, entirely new communities around us, with various implications. Silently, but surely, many species of problematic animals, such as disease vectors, mosquitoes, rats, what have you, they have steadily spread their influence across our urban environments. At the same time, many of the more beneficial ones that we should be looking to encourage, such as bees, butterflies, and many other pollinators, in fact, have gradually crept closer and closer towards extinction. And so the practice of butterfly gardening, or any form of urban biodiversity gardening, for that matter, is based on our understanding of this premise itself, right? Because if our environments, which are in their present state very beneficial to us as humans, and to some problematic animals, but generally inhospitable to the beneficial ones, are indeed modified and constructed, then surely it is also possible for us to then construct or reconstruct these environments in such a way where they become beneficial, not just to us, but also to the beneficial plants and animals who share these spaces with us. And so in early 2018, my colleague, Dr. Zoe, who is actually here today, by the way, and we both ran a pilot study, basically investigating the impact of butterfly gardening on improving the lepidopteran biodiversity of an urban garden plot. So after some negotiating, with our bosses, we were eventually successful at convincing Monash University Malaysia to allow us to set one up on campus grounds. And this initial butterfly garden, was established really on what is a very typical urban plot. So it was unused, it was unplanted, basically just an empty lawn that was located on the edges of our campus. It was not very big. It measured approximately 5 meters long, and it was about 2 meters wide at its widest, and just about 2 feet wide at its narrowest. So it sort of tapered a little bit. And we ran this study for a full year, so up until mid to late 2019, where we were actually able to document some incredibly positive trends among the local butterfly communities. So as the compiled table here indicates, not only did we record a 560% increase in the diversity of butterflies, we also noticed smaller positive increments in the population of other pollinators, such as here you got the bees and flower flies. And we also noticed small vertebrate communities returning to the plot as well. So we're finding things like small tree frogs, toads, various species of reptiles and birds foraging in and around the area. And here you can see some photographs of what we had to work with, and what we were able to achieve, in just under a year. So the two pictures here are actually, before pictures of what the land used to look like before we set up. And initially it was actually quite hard to get people to believe, like, oh yeah, we are gonna clear up this lawn here, and we're gonna set up this butterfly garden. And to be honest, aside from my boss at the time, Professor Andrew John Walker, bless him, many of the other people that we met, some of our own colleagues, in fact, were actually quite skeptical that we would succeed. Because nobody had really seen butterflies, in large quantities around campus, or even around Sunway City, for that matter. And I suppose many of them just found it difficult to believe that, such an endeavor would even be successful. But very fortunately for us, there was also a very small group of people who were very passionate about restoring urban biodiversity on campus. And we eventually managed to recruit some of these as volunteers. So many of the people actually in these photographs are mainly Monash alumni. So these are students who have graduated, who technically didn't even have to come back to campus, but who came back anyway over several weekends to help Dr. Zoe and myself. And it was a lot of back-breaking labor, to be honest, digging up all the grass and replacing the soil, and all of that. And so, as we started, what we did was we started by transplanting first native wild plants from the surrounding area into our garden plot. So we went around the outskirts of campus, pretty much just digging things up and bringing it back to campus and growing it there. And once these initial plants had began to, really settle in and stabilize, we started to get a bit more ambitious. And so we thought, okay, let's start bringing in more of an assortment of these ornamental flowering plants, also in an effort to, make our garden look a little bit more pretty, a bit more presentable. And this part of the project, was quite literally an experiment, because almost none of us had very extensive gardening background. None of us in our group are botanists, and so it was really a coin toss, sometimes whether a new species of plant that we were introducing to this plot was going to live or was going to die. And we also started to get a bit of, public attention, due to the fact that, we were almost always at the garden. We were there every morning, every evening, just watering and putting in new stuff, tossing out the dead things. And so we came up with the idea of setting up this community science project, first of all, to try and educate people about, the butterflies that can be found there and why it's important to conserve them. And also to create a sense of ownership, in the broader community by getting them involved. So fast forward to a month later, we're very excited. We welcomed our first caterpillars that were born at the garden. So these are caterpillars, whose parents sort of laid their eggs on plants we introduced here. And so these are caterpillars of the blue pansy butterfly, which is actually a very attractive and common butterfly. It used to be a very common species, but in many urban areas, I think you'll find that the blue pansy is becoming more and more rarely sighted in developed areas, including Sunway City. So we're very excited to welcome them. And about 3 or 4 months, I would say, into our efforts, we started to notice, this huge influx of butterflies coming in. And these are basically pictures of our results. So as I showed you all in the table earlier, we actually recorded a total of 28 different species of butterflies. So the ones depicted here aren't even, all of the species that we saw, they're just some of my favorites, personal favorites. And so the first 5 butterflies here on the top row, starting from the right. So these, on the first top row here, these are the initial species that we recorded on the site. So even before we started doing the garden, even before we brought the plants in, we did some butterfly observation, and these are the butterflies that were already there. And everything else you see, starting from the 6th butterfly on the top row onwards, these are butterflies that we successfully encouraged to come to our garden and to reproduce and to sort of stay there, once we started gardening. So initially, not all of these butterflies were reproducing at the garden. So sometimes you would see, butterflies that we had not seen before feeding on the flowers. And so whenever we made a new species record for the garden in this way, what we would do is also then try to conduct a bit of research on the species life history. So we would then seek out and try to obtain the suitable host plants for the caterpillars as well. So in time, and in this way, because we were constantly adding things there, the diversity of plants at our plot also increased quite greatly. And also because there was a lot of natural colonizing going on. There were a lot of little wildflowers and little bushes, I suppose weeds you would call them, that were just sort of popping up. And really, aside from the initial introduction of plants, we really tried to keep pruning and weeding and things like that to a bare minimum, because we really wanted to observe what some of these, butterfly plant interactions were. And we really wanted to, allow an opportunity for our community of plants and insects to self-regulate and thrive. And for us, as you can see here, it really seemed to produce some of the best results. Okay, so, one of the questions we get asked often is that, of all the things that we could conserve, all the species to work with, why did we choose butterflies? And really the short answer of it, is that, butterflies are, I personally feel butterflies are a very suitable flagship species for, insect conservation, mainly because, as adults, as adults, they do share a lot of resources with a wide range of other beneficial insects, such as flower flies and bees. And so, as generalist feeders, many of the flowering plants that you bring in, for adult butterflies are actually also suitable to sustain a healthy population of other pollinating insects. And also, butterflies, in both their adult and larval stages, they're a very important food source for a wide variety of animals, for birds and reptiles and amphibians. Um, and I think that's also why we notice, a small increase, in those animals coming to the garden as well. And the last and the final reason I think that, why we chose to select butterflies as sort of like our mascot is because, many butterflies are, especially urban ones, they're very large, they are brightly colored, they are easily recognizable, and so they are quite prime candidates, for simple observational studies, which was important to us, because we really wanted to be able to quantify, our observations to show our superiors that we were getting things done. And also, from an educational perspective, we also find, butterflies to possess a very strong and appealing, cross-cultural attraction across relatively broad demographics. So the visibility of butterflies, so again, because they're big and colorful, and also because they are generally unable to inflict physical harm, through the transmission of diseases or through biting or stinging, it really makes them excellent candidates for community science projects and also for amateur studies. So in fact, a significant portion of the population monitoring that we did, at the garden was actually even incorporated in one of Dr. Zoe and I's units last year. This is Introduction to Ecological Applications. And so through the use of a very simple QR code, on our informational signboard, we were then able to sort of integrate the citizen science and educational projects, into the garden signage itself. And I'm going to show you an example of what we created here. Okay, so basically scanning, the QR code at the bottom right of this butterfly signboard will lead you to this Google form, and first and foremost, what this is a comprehensive guide to butterflies that were recorded in the area. So when we came up with the sign, these were just the butterflies we saw, but as time, went by, there were more and more and more. So we integrated all of that, into this Google form. So you could sort of scan the code and see what butterfly you just saw, and then you'd have the identification written for you. But also, it was an opportunity for our visitors, people visiting our garden to also interact with it, by recording their observations and participating in the population monitoring study. And so the form, what I really liked about it was that it also automatically records, other data, such as the specific time of observation. And, so if we actually ran this project over a longer period, we might also have been able to, obtain some data that depicts the behavioral patterns of different species, depending, on how frequent they appear in the morning, or in the afternoon, or in the evening, and so on. There are, of course, many ways of doing this. I'm sure some of you are like way more tech savvy than us. But really we found this Google form to be perhaps the most straightforward, and easy way, and it worked for us for a time, right? So really, if you have a bit of land at your disposal, setting up your own butterfly garden really is not too difficult. And I gather that most of you who are attending, this talk today are here precisely because you're interested in doing something like this for yourselves. In fact, even if you don't have land, to work on, so Zoe and I both live in apartments, it is also something that you can, contribute to by sort of urging your respective institutions or community representatives, to work on as well. And so what I'm going to be sharing with you now is essentially some tips on how to help you get started. And what we're going to be talking most extensively about is various criteria for plant selection. So, whenever I do one of these workshops, whenever I go somewhere and I talk to people about butterfly gardening, one of the first things that people want to know is what types of plants they should be growing. What species of plants are optimum for attracting and sustaining a healthy population of native butterflies. And many people, that I've spoken to, especially those who are not intimately familiar with, the life cycles of these insects, often think that you can just sort of simply grow anything like, just like chinchay, grow whatever plants and that will work. But, of course, as many of us would know, this is not true. Because, to come up with the ideal composition of plants, in your butterfly garden, one of the first things you need to do is to make this distinction between the larval host plant and the adult food plant. And so the larval host plant, these are species of plants that are necessary for butterflies to complete their larval stages. Whereas the adult food plants are pretty much flowers that adult butterflies prefer to feed on. And I think the great thing, about butterfly gardening is that because, the different life stages of butterflies have different needs, they feed on different plants, is that you can then sort of partition your garden or create a segregated area in such a way, where you have plots of more attractive flowers up front, where, the adult butterflies can fly and they're beautiful, they're taking center stage, and put your larval host plants, somewhere at the back where they're hidden. Especially if you're worried, that the sight of, wriggling caterpillars or leaves full of holes, would be quite, would be offensive to your visitors somehow. Right? And, fortunately, because most butterflies are generalists, it is really not that difficult to choose adult food plants for the butterflies. Of course, there will be certain flowers that butterflies are more attracted to than others. And these are flowers that meet the cool category. So you have like C for cluster flowers, E for exposed nectaries, W for warmer colors, and L for longer stamens. So the first thing that you will find, if you go out there and you try to observe butterfly attracting plants, is that what a lot of them have in common is that they have, these sort of flowers that bloom in a cluster sort of pattern. So these are plants where multiple flowers sort of are grouped together on each flower stalk. Some examples are like lantana, Ixora, Bauhinia, Saraka, or Buddleia. And you will also find, if you, again, if you do a bit of observation of butterflies in their natural habitat, that adult butterflies also like exposed nectaries. Exposed nectaries are basically flowers with very short nectar receptacles. So flowers from the family Asteraceae or, daisies, daisy-like flowers. These are usually excellent choices, because most of them possess bright colors and they have very short nectar receptacles that are very easy for butterflies to access. I've heard that some people are asking me whether, they can grow things like morning glory or the butterfly pea, the blue flower that they color the rice with, and, butterflies do sometimes visit them, but, as a general rule, many tube-shaped flowers, so again, like your morning glory, they tend to be more frequently visited by bees compared to butterflies. Because, many times, because they're tube-shaped, the nectar receptacle is actually too deep for many medium and smaller sized butterflies to access. So it's not very easy for them to access. So they don't prefer it. Although they will visit it, if there's a shortage of other food sources. And then also, in terms of color, we find that butterflies tend to generally be more attracted to colors on the warmer end of the spectrum, as opposed to bees, which tend to be attracted to colors on the cooler end of the spectrum. So from our garden, we noticed that blue and purple and lavender flowers tend to be more attractive to various species of bees. Whereas butterflies tend to go for flowers that are, in shades of pinks, reds, yellows, oranges, or even whites, actually. In fact, if you're in the forest and you want to see butterflies, one thing you can do is actually you can lay down a piece of red cloth on the forest floor, and you'll find that many species of butterflies, even the ones that usually just stick to the upper canopy levels, they will actually briefly descend to investigate when they see the red color, because they are attracted by the color. And that's just a little trick that I learned from the indigenous people that I work with who engaged in the practice of butterfly collecting. But anyway, the last one is the longest stamens, right? So yeah, so if you're fortunate enough, right, and you notice that you have larger butterflies in your area, so these are like the swallowtails or birdwing butterflies, and you wish to attract them to your garden, many of the above same principles apply. So they do like flowers with shorter nectar receptacles, warmer colors, but you can also try to go for plants with longer stamens and exerted anther. So the stamen and the anther is, that part of the flower that sticks out where the pollen is attached. So, on the hibiscus that you can see here, that's that long string, the thing that sort of just dangles out of it. And some popular plants, with this sort of longest stamen or an exerted anther trait that birdwings and swallowtails like are plants such as Clerodendrum, the pagoda flower. I believe if you've been to the habitat on Penang Hill, you see that they have quite a lot of those growing there. And you almost always see red Helen swallowtails on them. It's lovely. Cassiopeia, the peacock flower, that's also a very popular choice. Or even hibiscus, as you can see, the birdwing butterfly and the hibiscus here. In fact, it is actually hypothesized that many of these flowers that have evolved this sort of structure, this sort of exerted anther structure, actually evolved in this way because they rely primarily on wing pollination. And wing pollination is basically an ecosystem service that is mainly provided by large butterflies. Having said that, it is very important to remember that you need to be growing both the adult food plants as well as the larval host plants. All right, so both a combination of both plants are equally important if you want to be able to sustain this stable population of butterflies. So it's really not enough. A lot of people are surprised to hear this, but it's really not enough to just grow flowers. Because without a reliable food source that they can breed on, the butterfly community in your locality or area, they will eventually still not be able to sustain themselves, in the long run. And you might find yourself, eventually sort of seeing lesser and lesser butterflies as time goes by. And so the other thing, you need to know is how to select the larval host plants. And actually, I should have presented this first because really you should be doing this even before looking at bringing in your flowers, and the way that we have done this, because really there is not a lot that is known on the life histories of many butterfly species. On a lot of the common ones, yes, but for a majority of species out there, especially the smaller ones, we don't really know what they need to breed on, what they lay their eggs on. And so what we actually did, in the first place was try to make a list of which butterflies were already present, in our local environment, which is where the pre-observation comes in. Because there's really no sense in just going to a butterfly guide and saying, oh, butterflies want this, and you get all those plants there, and if it turns out that those butterflies are not even in your area to begin with, it's all just going to be wasted effort. And so it is quite crucial, to take this first steps, by observing and by identifying which butterflies you see in your surrounding area. And this is where working with butterflies actually proves to be an advantage to us, because as I've said multiple times, butterflies, they are large, they're colorful, which means they are also easily identifiable with a bit of practice using any comprehensive butterfly guide. And because female butterflies will choose the plants that they want to reproduce on, once you have identified the butterflies in your area, what you can do then is the same that we did, essentially a bit of research on what their interactions with local flora are. You know, if you can't find any resources online, one thing that we also did was to just sort of head out, you know, just step outside into your garden, to your park, wherever, and try to pay attention to what the butterflies are doing. So you're going to be looking for butterflies stopping, laying eggs, and laying their eggs, you know, on plants. And so these plants that the butterflies lay their eggs on, these are the first few plants that you should be looking at cultivating, you know, even before bringing in, and anything else. The unfortunate thing is, because many of these butterfly larval host plants, you know, are essentially what many of us will consider, you know, to be weeds. It's very difficult, you know, for me to tell you which exact plant they are, because I don't even know the names of all of our weeds. And it's not, you know, exactly something that you might be able to just go and buy, you know, at your local nursery. But the silver lining to this is, because many of them are weeds, nobody is likely going to raise a fuss. You know, if upon discovering a butterfly host plant, you decide to just dig it up and bring it home, which is what we did. You can see on the picture in the top right here. You know, when we started our project, you know, the first plants that we grew, you know, were actually transplant weeds that we transplanted from a plot of land that was about to be converted into a parking lot. Because, you know, we had identified here, you know, from our pre-observation that there were actually a lot of butterflies reproducing in that area. You know, and then when they told us that they were going to clear that area and they were going to turn it into this parking lot, we just thought, okay, you know, let's just bring some of these plants over first and build on from there. So the thing to remember, you know, is that what we are essentially trying to build here is a sustainable habitat for a community of local butterflies and other pollinators. You know, and so in nature, right, every species that makes up the composition of a community, you know, they go through a series of checks and balances or filters that ultimately decide whether or not they are capable of adapting, and whether or not they're capable of integrating with the other plants and animals that are already in the area. And this process is something that, you know, we ecologists know as the community assembly theory. It is not really important, you know, for you to understand what all of the big words in this diagram mean. But I'm showing this to you, you know, to sort of give you an ability to visualize, you know, because essentially in an artificial environment, you know, in our gardens, in our urban cities, you know, every stage of this selection, you know, that would be otherwise be driven by, you know, the environment, by interspecies interaction. You know, in our gardens, every stage of this filter is actually driven by us. You know, we decide at the end of the day what plants we want to go into our garden, you know, which plants we want to allow to propagate, and how widely they'll be allowed to spread. And so by controlling, you know, the species composition of plants that we grow, you know, we ultimately also control what animals are capable of living and thriving in the spaces, you know, that we've created. And so when you're creating a butterfly garden, you know, it is useful to think of it as sort of like this living experiment, where ultimately you get to decide what the final community makeup will look like. And so my advice to you here is to always start small and try to pay attention not only to how well your plants are growing in your garden, but also if they are attracting any local butterflies or any, you know, pollinators. And if they are, then you can consider maybe adding more of those species. However, you know, if you notice that perhaps some species aren't doing so well, perhaps, you know, the conditions are not great, maybe they're being outcompeted by plants that are already there, or more importantly, if you introduce a plant and it's not really being interacted with by any of the local butterflies, then it may be time, you know, to consider getting rid of that and trying something else. Growing your butterfly garden in this way, you know, using this approach will almost certainly guarantee success. You know, because what you're doing, you know, in effect, by keeping plants that butterflies go to and getting rid of the ones that they're not, what you're actually doing is allowing the butterflies to choose what plants they would like to have in the garden through you. And I understand that this sounds like a lot of work. And to be honest, like maybe it is, but to make things a little bit easier for you, at the very least, what we have done is we've compiled a folder of all the resources that we have compiled, throughout the 1 year of running this project. So they contain, among other things, butterfly ID guides and also a list of butterflies we've identified along with their larval host plants. And I'm going to be sharing this, all of this with you at the end of this presentation. But before I do that, there's one final thing that I would like to talk about, and that is some of the challenges that we've had to face when working with this project. So I feel that the current mindset, that many people have today, especially if they're not, wildlife or wildlife enthusiasts or environmentalists, and it's a mindset really that's been driven by centuries of social conditioning, is that they feel that, our lived environment, that the human environment needs to be very carefully designed, very closely manicured and very sterile. Even in these so-called like green cities and communities, a lot of the newer ones that have come up, Sunway City, in fact, labels itself as a green city, and we tend to witness, in many of these spaces, an almost clinical, honestly, clinical obsession with closely manicuring the lawns, closely sculpting all the hedges, and we also see an abundance, an inordinate abundance of non-native ornamental plants, which are not really of any use to local wildlife. So they do look very pleasing, have these beautiful green walls and trees that look beautiful, but when you look closer, there's no signs of faunal interaction, that there are no birds building their nests in the trees, there are no insects munching at the leaves, there are no flowers that are attracting butterflies or bees or anything like that. And so, there is really very little space, in our urban communities that we have, just sort of set aside and really allowed nature to thrive, to run wild, But, when it comes down to that, that is precisely what butterflies, bees, and many other beneficial animals, that's precisely what they need, to thrive, in otherwise, in our otherwise very sterile, even hostile environment. And so the other important thing to consider when we garden for butterflies is to also try and help each other, help others, get over some of that preoccupation that all of us have to some degree, for organizing and tidying, and really just allocate a spot, in our communities where things are allowed to just grow a little wild. Because a lot of the stuff that we meticulously get rid of, a lot of the grasses and the wildflowers and the shrubs and the vines, that are very weedy, very semak, to us, they do play a very important role, in fact, they are irreplaceable. We cannot just swap them out for ornamentals because of that vital nature that they have, the vital position they have in the life cycles of countless species of native animals and other pollinators. And this is not so much a challenge if you're, gardening for yourself, but, if you're like us, setting up a butterfly garden for a broader community or for a school, or for an organization, for example, in a public park, it is a challenge because a majority of people who do not yet know how to appreciate these things, who are not yet so, environmentally conscious, they're going to walk by and, likely all that you will see is this, horrendous mess, and they will see, like these leaves with holes in them and all these like unkempt grasses. And I think sometimes it can cause people to get a bit alarmed, and they tend to lose sight, of the goal of the project. As a matter of fact, I'm very sad to report that we actually lost our own butterfly garden towards the end of last year because of, these reasons. It didn't even matter, to some people that there were all these clouds of butterflies there, or that we had, put up signages and signboards, to educate people, to get them involved, in a science, in a piece of research, and to some people, really all it did was look like one huge mess, and so despite our best efforts, despite countless follow-up negotiations and rescue attempts, unfortunately, a decision was made to clear up our plot, to tidy it up. And so overnight, our entire garden, which was at that time, this thriving patch of flowers, was returned to basically a manicured lawn. And these days, if you go there, you are lucky if you can even spot, a single butterfly in the area. So we really, in a year, literally went back to square one. And the reason I'm sharing all of this with you, and the reason why I'm being so transparent and so frank with you about this, is not to discourage or to disparage anyone, but rather, it's just to let you know, as much as we were expecting some pushback, I don't think we adequately anticipated the extent of how much some people would be opposed to something like this. And so I think it is very important also to acknowledge, some of these obstacles, especially if, like us, you're thinking of setting one up on behalf of someone else or on public spaces or in public spaces. But really, institutional challenges aside, again, if you're just doing this on a personal level, I think you will find, that butterfly gardening, it is quite fulfilling, fulfilling and worthwhile activity. For me anyway, there is really nothing quite as rewarding as, stepping out into a garden which I have cultivated that has now transformed into this oasis, of color and of life and diversity. In fact, back in the day, when our garden was still around, one of the things that I did every morning, before even stepping into my office, was to just head out back and spend half an hour, just sort of appreciating the colors of all the flowers that were blooming and the activity of all the butterflies and other insects that were there. Yeah, and yeah, I guess that is pretty much all that I have prepared to share with you today. So I will now pass the floor back to Shu, to moderate the question and answer session. But before I do, I would also like to share with you all of the resources that we've compiled as promised. So you can either just go to the URL on the top of the page, or simply scan the QR code on the screen here. And you will find like I said, the butterfly ID guide, the template which we used to set up our community science project, and some of the lists compiled of the various butterflies and their preferred plants. All right, so thank you everyone for being such attentive audience, and thank you again for taking so much time on your Friday evening just to tune in. I'm going to pass it back to you now, Shu.
All right, thank you so much for the incredible insights on butterfly garden. So does anyone have any question? Please write it down in the chat box. So wait for a bit if you have any questions. Trouble in your head, and then you slowly want to write out. So in the meantime, what are you? Is there any butterfly garden project that you're working on?
No, we're not. So since our the previous garden, was sort of reclaimed, we haven't really done a second one for our campus. We have. Well, I personally have been working with some other institutions. For example, Sunway University had approached me sometime last year to set one up as well. So they did, but again, we fall into a lot of the same pitfalls, that we did. When setting up, they were very clear that they didn't want weeds growing there, that everything had to be very manicured, and then they were not willing to budge on that. So I tried my best to advise they brought in the plants, and it does have some butterflies, but not as many that we had. Yeah, so I think really that assemblage of native plants and also ornamentals. I think that assemblage is very important. It's very important to have sort of a balance of both. Oh, I think we've got some questions.
Yeah, from Fabienne. I hope I pronounced your name right. Alright, so let's see some of the questions lah. So Fabienne, hopefully again your name pronounced right. He said hi. Thanks for the amazing talk, Cyren. Is there any online resource of local butterflies?
There is. It's not technically like a Malaysian one, but the Singapore butterfly watching community is very active, and they actually have a very good blog. So in the blog they actually have listed the life histories of various species. So you can see what the eggs look like, what the caterpillars look like, and sometimes they even ID the plants for you. So that was actually one of our sources as well. When we didn't know what a plant was, or we found a butterfly and we didn't know what its host was, we would go. This blog was one of the blogs that we went to. Just give me a bit. I will find the link for you and share it in the chat.
Well, you share
it. It's butterflycircle.blogspot.com.
Okay, so it's shared.
Here.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we shared it. Great.
Very laju.
Yeah, that's the one.
All right. So next, I think so. This is the thought from Yok Movie. Sometimes it's good to leave some areas of the garden a little bit wild, like the and all, as this is the sort of place that supports insect life, including butterflies and larvae. And yes, less manicured areas. And we have Jonathan shared your link.
Yeah.
And then what else do we have? Joshua, what are the conditions or aspects we need to consider in setting up butterfly garden? For example, it is suitable to do at places near to busy roadside.
Yeah, so obviously environmental factors will come into play as well. Our butterfly garden was actually, next to a car park and sort of like a pedestrian walkway. We were initially quite worried, that because there's a lot of human activity, that people are always walking back and forth. We actually worried that would, impact the butterflies, but they didn't seem to mind so much. I think if you were to set one up at a busy roadside, that would be a problem. I didn't talk much about it, but actually habitat fragmentation, so that's when one tract of forest, it sort of gets developed and then you're only left with little islands of forest here and there. Habitat fragmentation, that's actually a huge problem as well, because when butterflies try to fly from, one forest to the next, one of the things that kills them is actually the cars, our freeways, yeah. So yeah, those are things you would have to consider as well.
So I have a question lah. So what's the impact of things like fogging on, or like when you smoke, what you call it, that open burning, on the butterflies?
So I am personally not a fan of mosquito fogging. I don't know how much of this I can share because Dr. Zoe, who's here, and I, our team recently did this study with the Kota Damansara Community Forest. We did a fogging study, basically looking at the indirect effects of fogging on non-target insects. And just a summary of it, I won't go into too much detail. Maybe after it's published, I can share a bit more. But in summary, it's not good for a lot of non-target animals. So we saw a lot of deaths of thrips. Thrips are a very important pollinator of macaranga trees. So macaranga are usually one of the first trees that grow whenever a forest replenishes. We saw a lot of spider deaths, a lot of small soft-bodied invertebrates, butterfly, Lepidopteran larvae, a lot of them were affected. And perhaps the most like shocking thing is like, we did this, fogging study at several different sites, and we didn't collect like a single mosquito. So go figure.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a question here. What about moths? Moths similarly attracted to the plant.
Sorry, my chat just kind of reset. What was the question?
How about moths? Moths similarly attracted to the plant.
Moths in general are less of specialists, than butterflies. So in my experience, a lot of butterflies, like, they tend to go for either very specific plants, so they will eat nothing else but that one, or they will eat nothing but plants from within that same family. But many moths, for example, like the Atlas moth, which is a very big, very colorful moth. Their larva pretty much eats anything, like you can find them on guava trees, rambutan trees, lime trees, lantana, willow trees, like they're not deep. But they will also have their own preferences, so it's very important that we don't generalize. I've heard a lot of people say like, oh, you should grow citrus. Citrus trees attract a lot of butterflies, which is true. Citrus trees do attract a lot of butterflies, but they all tend to be butterflies from the swallowtail family. So like the lime swallowtail, the common Mormon, great Mormon, and they wouldn't be, say, attractive to other species of butterflies from other families, So, oh, Zoe says yes, I can share. Yeah, so I think it's really important to not overgeneralize, So if you've observed something in your garden and you would like more of it to come, just do a little bit of reading up about it, or try to pay attention to what it likes, when you see it, what flowers is it landing on, what plants is it going to lay its eggs on, and that's how you can make sure that what you are growing is useful to a specific butterfly that you want to attract, as opposed to just, okay, I'm just going to grow lime and like cross my fingers and hope something shows up, like, yeah.
Want to be adventurous, so who knows? You might find, if
Yeah.
participants would like to create your own butterfly garden, you might find like different species from the one that Dr. Cyren just showed us. All right. So, any more questions? I think so. We can take one more if there's any. I don't. It's more like everyone giving suggestions and opinions. One method we use is to ask.
Oh yeah, so that was one thing that we did as well. I think that was, yeah, thanks Zoe, like I forgot to talk about that. So one of the things that we did, and I think this was also a really good method, is like, so we have a nursery in Sunway City, and we went to them and we said like, if you ever find caterpillars in your plants, like don't spray the poison and don't kill them, call us, we'll come and we'll buy the plant from you. And then we'll grow it on our garden. So that's one thing that we did as well. I think we got like 2 or 3 plants like that before they stopped calling us.
Okay, so I think so that's all. I don't see any more questions coming in. So wrapping up, thank you everyone for staying with us. Thank you, Dr. Cyren, again. Next week we will be learning on biodiversity gardening. Lepas tu, tunggulah next week. Okay, so my workmate, my mate here, Shangmin, will share the QR code on the screen right now. So for feedbacks lah, so I hope everyone can please scan the QR code. We really appreciate it if you could give your thoughts lah on the series. So share with us your thoughts. If you have more suggestions like, oh, hey, I planted this and I saw this butterfly that came, or I tried doing this urban farming or whatever. Yeah, anything saja lah, bagi saja, boleh saja. So before we end, promote a bit lah. If you are a butterfly enthusiast or would like to know more what Dr. Cyren Wong does, you can follow his Facebook page like he showed just now, Naturetalksback with Dr. Cyren as Ran. Yeah, right. So do follow us on the 3 giant social media pages, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, Urban Biodiversity Initiative at UB_MY, that's at UBI_MY, all small letters. if you're interested to learn or would like to educate other people, if let's say you're a teacher, do check our website. That's ubi-my.com, ubi-my.com. In our website, we have plenty of urban wildlife resources for you guys, like urban plants, urban animals, artificial plants, food, biodiversity gardens, wildflowers. You might come across some flowers that Dr. Cyren showed just now, and also some write-ups from our online workshop. So we already posted one, the last week's write-up, the last week's workshop punya write-up. Macam tu lah. Okay. Alright, so that's all. Thank you again, and
Thanks
see you
everyone.
next week.